Many of us would have seen all the recent wall-to-wall coverage about the latest IPCC report, which lays out the physical basis for climate change. And the key messages they've given us are quite unequivocal about the perilous state of the planet today. The report itself is much clearer in terms of its headline messages. It's much less uncertain about key points and variables in the larger climate system. And it gives countries and society at large a much clearer sense of the nature of the challenge and the time spans within which it needs to be addressed. At the same time, we're also at this crucial international juncture, which is one of the reasons this report has come out when it has, because we're months away from a major international climate summit. And it's really one of the most important climate summits in history. And it puts pressure on every country to demonstrate credible and aggressive action, not only in the present, but also moving forward. It's within this context that we've put out two policy briefs that lay out a plan for how the Indian state should grapple with and equip itself to deal with climate change. And so this is very specifically about India's climate governance structures and how they should change to adapt to present day climate realities. So it's a valid question to ask, why should we care about governance structures and institutions when the focus is entirely on aggressive policies? And the answer to that is, it's within institutional contexts that strategies are created and policies are created over many, many years. And getting the institutions right is really getting a big part of the puzzle in terms of our climate response right. And it's something that people don't talk about nearly enough. And so that's why we've made this out. In a country like India, which is very large, it makes the challenge of putting out a blueprint is quite vexing, because it forces us to recognize not only with the sprawl of national government, but at the same time to deal with the enormous role of the states, given the constitutional structure of the country, and the nature of the climate problem, which really puts an emphasis on states because they both deal with impacts at the first responders for climate impacts, but also in reducing carbon emissions. So we try to address both of those aspects. One of the big messages is it's not just one thing that needs to change in building this climate machine. It's actually a range of things that need to be created and interlock to create a structure that functions efficiently over time. At the core of our recommendations is the need to bring more credible and rigorous analysis into policy making, because at present, India really doesn't have a home for analytical policy making. The way it works is different ministries and departments and governance bodies at all scales, state and local levels, think up their climate policies, but often without informational knowledge backbone to support their conclusions. And so we think about creating an institution within the government and that allows for credible and rigorous analysis. And so we've come up with a model of an independent expert institution called the LCDC, the Low Carbon Development Commission, for this purpose. And this will interface with the states, with ministries within central government, and try and network itself into their decision-making processes. And at the same time, corral the energies of central universities and civil society organizations and try to embed them more in the policy process, because there's an enormous amount of latent analytical power within Indian society that isn't tapped at the moment. We also focus very heavily, the second big thrust of it, apart from an analytical core, is really creating more capacity within government. So we call for a big increase in climate specialization in India's states. So we call for new departments and nodes within state governments. We call for climate personnel within ministries in the national government, just so that these ministries are better able to comprehend and talk about climate impacts. The third big chunk is really about creating new fiscal incentives to motivate ministries and states, because the nature of climate politics in India as such is that is such that we don't have bottom-up pressure generated by the existential politics of climate change like we have in other developed countries. It really has to be carefully put together. The incentives for climate action have to be carefully put together to motivate ministries and motivate governments at various levels to come up with progressive action on climate change. And we talk about a few fiscal levers in this regard, but also, and finally, we talk about a range of new processes through which this can happen. And to give you an example, we talk about how ministries would do well to submit annual mitigation reports to Parliament and public scrutiny. We talk about how states should put together state action plans on climate change and on a regular basis, which gives these organizations, these bodies, time and space and an opportunity to build plans and refine them over time as the nature of climate change becomes clearer and climate science becomes more specific and climate politics itself at the international and domestic levels change.